and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how I painted up this player for the Norse Blood Bowl Team. So to start off with, I've primed the model black, as this will give us an even base coat to work off of for all of the colours we're going to apply. And the first thing I'm coming in with is Naggaroth Knight, and I'm going to paint all of the armour and all of the fabric that's on the model. So I'm starting off by painting the shoulder pads here and the jacket and trousers that's on the model. Now by keeping your paint nice and thin and building up over a couple of layers, we'll get a nice solid cover for Naggaroth Knight all over the armour and the fabric on the model. So just take your time, work your way around the model, picking out any of the fabric such as the trousers and the jacket and all of the armour panels with some Naggaroth Knight. I'm not painting the loincloth at this stage because I'm going to come in with another colour and paint that part later. Don't forget any of the armour panels that are on the back, as well as the shoulder guards and the armour panels on the arms as well. And after a couple of coats of Naggaroth Knight, we've built up a nice solid purple colour all over that armour and fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm coming in with some Bugman's Glow. I'm going to paint all of the skin that's on the model. So because of the face mask, I can't see a lot of the actual face of this model. I'm going to paint the neck and all the arms and the hands and any other exposed bits of flesh on the model. If you can, reach in between any of the slits on the face guard to paint any skin you can see, but just make sure you cover all of the exposed skin with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow. And after a couple of coats of Bugman's Glow, we've got a nice solid cover all over that skin. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm coming in with some Avalan Sunset, and for this I'm going to paint the loincloth, the trim and the hair to the model. So I'm starting off by painting the loincloth here. This is going to take a couple of coats to get a solid cover. Be nice and neat when you're around the purple, you don't want to get this over anything else. Just paint all of that loincloth with a couple of coats of Avalan Sunset. I'm also going to catch all of the trim on all of the armour panels with some Avalan Sunset as well. So use a nice small brush for this. Just catch all of those raised parts of trim with some Avalan Sunset. Some of these details are very small, so by keeping a nice tip to our brush, we can catch these raised details without painting over any of the purple armour. So once again, this will take a couple of coats to get a solid cover. Just keep working your way around the model, picking out all of the trim on that armour with some Avalan Sunset. Don't forget this panel here on the back. I'm catching the trim on this with some yellow as well. Finally, make sure you paint any exposed hair with some Avalan Sunset as well, because this will give our player that nice Nordic blonde haired look. And after the first coat, you can see it's still quite patchy here on the loincloth, so I'm coming back in with a second coat. just to build up till we get a nice solid cover of Avalanche Sunset all over that loincloth. So don't be afraid to come in for 2 or 3 coats until we get a nice solid cover all over that fabric. And after a couple of coats, we've got a solid yellow colour all over those areas. So the next thing I'm going to paint on this model is any strapping that's on it. So I'm coming in with some Rawk flesh, and we're going to paint all these areas of strapping and banding that are on the model. So she's got some straps here on her chest. And there's some here around her arms as well. So catch these with a couple of coats of Rawk flesh. I'm also going to pick out any horns as well. So there's these 2 here on her helmet, and there's one around her waist as a drinking horn as well. So make sure you catch these with some Rawk flesh. And there's also all this strapping here around her legs. To be nice and neat with this, try to not get this over any of the purple. Just pick out all of these bits of strapping around her legs with a couple of layers of Rawk flesh as well. So the strapping goes all the way around the legs, really helps break up that purple colour and add a little bit of interest to the model. And after a couple of coats of Rawk flesh, is we've picked out those horns and that strapping with a nice solid coat of Rawk flesh. So I'm coming in with some Mechanica Standard Grey. And for this, I'm just going to pick out any fur details on the model. So this one's got some fur here around their waist. So I'm just going to pick all of these details out with some Mechanica Standard Grey. And with that fur picked out, there's only a few more details left to base coat on the model. So now I'm coming in with some Corvus Black, and for this I'm going to paint the boots and any beads that are on the model. So give the boots a couple of coats of Corvus Black. And also pick out any beads that may be around the waist of the model as well. Just pick these out nice and neatly with some Corvus Black. And with that Corvus Black applied, all that's left to do now is to apply the metallics. So first of all, I'm coming in with some Retributor armour. I'm going to paint any details that I want to be gold. So for this, I'm doing the buckle here, some of these sort of detail plates here, like this one on her chest, and the one on her waist as well. There's some trim on the drinking horn that I'm going to pick out with Retributor armour. And also any trim details on the helmet as well. I'm going to pick these out with a coat of Retributor armour. And with all of the gold details picked out in Retributor armour, all that's left to do now is to pick out a couple of silver details. So for this I'm coming in with Lead Belcher. I'm going to pick out the weapon here in her hand, and any rings on the model as well. There's also the face mask part here. Just going to pick this with a coat of Lead Belcher as well. So I'm just finding any remaining details, picking them out with a couple of coats of Lead Belcher. And there you go, with that Lead Belcher applied, that's all the base coats applied to the model. So the next step now is we're going to shade. So to start with, I'm coming in with some Reichland Flesh Shade. For this I'm going to shade all of the skin. So it's the hands, the neck, exposed elbows. I'm also going to shade the hair to the model with Reichland Flesh Shade as well, because it's helped give us that deeper colour to give us that blonde look on the model. Now with some Agrak's Earth Shade. Coming in, I'm going to shade all of the gold details. Try to shade all of the helmet here to catch all the gold. And anything else that we painted with Retributor armour. And finally with Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade the rest of the details. So that's all of the silver, all of the strapping, as well as the purple and the yellow. The only thing I'm not going to shade at this point is the horns on her head. I'm going to come in later with a different painting technique to add some detail to those horns. It's now to shade the rest of the model with some Nuln Oil.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
And with those shades dried, you can see we've really added some definition to the model. Now the first thing I'm going to start highlighting is the fabric. So I'm coming in with some Nagaroth Night again, and wherever the shade hasn't settled, I'm going to come in and brighten those areas back up. So we can see here that some of that Nuln Oil settled into these recesses. So I'm coming on either side with some thinned down Nagaroth Night and bringing all of those raised areas back up to colour. You want to keep the paint nice and thin at this stage, so it flows nice and easily off of the brush, isn't too thick to obscure any detail, and help build up to those transitions for our highlights we'll be adding all over this fabric. So just work your way around the model. Wherever there's Nuln Oil settled in one of the recesses, come in on either side of the recess and brighten those raised areas back up to their original colour. Don't forget to highlight any parts of the shirt as well as the trousers to bring all of that fabric back up to colour. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Nagaroth Night and Warp Fiend Grey. I'm going to place this in the middle of all of those areas that we just placed the Nagaroth Night. So wherever we place some of that previous layer, coming in with a bit of this 50-50 mix, keeping it nice and thin, I'm going to apply that on all of those most raised areas to build up towards our highlight. By keeping this nice and thin, you'll allow some of that previous layer to show through, which will really help to build up that smooth transition to a brighter highlight. So once again, just take your time, work your way around the model, and all the fabric areas that we just applied to the Nagaroth Night. Apply some of this 50-50 mix in the middle of those areas. Now with that mix applied, you can see it's brought some colour back up to some of those raised areas and really brightened them up. So now I'm coming in with some warp themed grey, and for this I'm going to do an edge highlight on all the sharpest folds and creases on all of that fabric. So all of the highest points, most raised details, giving them a thin edge highlight with pure warp themed grey to really emphasise those details. So to pick the edges of all the folds, the tops of any creases and any sharp areas to give this a thin edge highlight of warp themed grey. As you can probably spot, this isn't based off the box art paint schemes that's used by Games Workshop. This is my own paint scheme I decided to come up with for painting my Norse Blood Bowl team. I'm also going to highlight these parts of here of the helmet, just so they look like really sharp points of metal. And with that warp theme grey applied, that is the final highlight on all the fabric. So now I'm going to come in with some Avalanche Sunset. I'm going to start highlighting that cloth. So much like before, I'm coming in all the raised areas where the shade didn't settle and bringing that area back up to its brighter yellow colour. So this is just on the cloth, you don't need to worry about doing this to the rest of the yellow details yet. And then I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Uriel Yellow and placing this in the middle of the areas that I just applied that pure Avalanche Sunset. And finally, with some pure Uriel Yellow, I'm going to put a line just at the top of all of these folds as an edge highlight. And I'm also going to highlight all of the trim we painted yellow with Uriel Yellow as well. So for this, just catch the most raised point at the very edge of all of the trim details with a thin line of Uriel Yellow as an edge highlight. Now some of these sharper points like here, you can use the side of your brush, so you just catch the very edge and just work your way around. Pick out all of the yellow trim with some Uriel Yellow. And with that applied, that is now all the fabric and the armour trim highlighted. So now I'm coming in with some Mechanica Standard Grey. For this I'm going to highlight the boots and the beads. So I'm just picking the sharpest points on the boots, any folds, creases or edges, and just catching them with a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey. And I'm also going to catch any raised details on the beads around her waist with some Mechanica Standard Grey as well. And with that applied, that is the black details highlighted. So next I'm going to start highlighting the fur. So with this I'm coming in with some Dawnstone to start with. I'm applying a thin spot on any of the most raised hairs that are on this fur. So just take your time, work your way around that midsection, and on any of the most raised or pronounced hairs of the fur, just pick them out with a small spot of Dawnstone. And then with some Administratum Grey, I'm going to add a smaller spot within all those areas we just applied some Dawnstone. So pick out some of those hairs we just highlighted and catch the very tips with a little spot of Administratum Grey. And with that fur highlighted, the next thing we're going to move on to is highlighting the skin. So for this, I'm coming back in with some Bugman's Glow. And I'm going to place this on all the raised areas that the shade didn't settle. There'll be areas here like the fingers and the palm of the hands, and the back of the hand as well. Basically anywhere that the shade has gone into a recess, coming in on either side of it, bringing it back up to colour with some Bugman's Glow. See here I'm applying this raised muscle here in the middle, but I'm leaving that Reichman flesh shade in the recesses around all of these areas. Now with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone, coming back in and applying this in the middle of those areas we just applied the Bugman's Glow. So try and keep these focused into the middle of those areas and the highest points. Just apply a little bit of this 50-50 mix in the middle of all of those areas. And with that mix applied, we're starting to add some definition to those muscles and building up towards our highlight. So I'm coming in with some pure Cadian Flesh Tone. And once again, putting this in the middle of those areas we just applied that mix. So focus this onto the most raised areas and spots that the light would catch the most, and just apply a little bit of Cadian Flesh Tone to bring those areas up to a brighter colour. And finally, with some Kislev flesh, I'm going to pick out the sharpest points of the skin and apply a little bit of Kislev flesh. So it's things here like the knuckles and the fingertips. I'm going to catch these with a little spot of Kislev flesh, as well as the very palms of her hand as well. Let's catch all these areas with a small spot of Kislev flesh. And with that applied, that is now the skin fully highlighted. So the next thing I'm going to highlight is the hair. So for this I'm coming in with some Tau Light Ochre. I'm just going to pick out some of the most pronounced strands of the hair coming down the back of her neck. So any of these really sculpted on large details or parts to her braid, I'm going to catch these with a thin line of Tau Light Ochre. With that Tau Light Ochre applied, that is the hair highlighted. There's only a few steps left to go now on painting this model. So next, I'm coming in with some Pallid Witch Flesh. I'm going to highlight all of the strapping. So for this, any of the sharp details at the edge of one of these bands of strapping, I'm catching it with a thin line of Pallid Witch Flesh as an edge highlight. You can see where the shade has settled into all of those recesses. So I'm catching the sharp points near all those recesses, just catching them with a thin edge highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh. Some of these ones here on the legs, you can just do one line rather than trying to highlight both edges. Just highlight the top edge of each of these bands of strapping with a thin line of Pallid Witch Flesh. Help make them pop out against the rest of the model. And with that strapping highlighted, the model's really starting to come together now. So now with some Liberator Gold, I'm going to highlight all of the areas that we painted with Retributor armour. So with all of these gold details here, just coming around and giving them an edge highlight of Liberator Gold, just to give that gold a little bit of a shine. Be nice and careful on the helmet, pick out some of the studs and some of the edges, just to add some interest and a highlight to some of those gold areas. And with that Liberator Gold applied, the next thing we're going to highlight is any of the silver details. So for that I'm coming in with Stormhose Silver. I'm going to give an edge highlight to the weapon here in her hand. I'm just running along the edge of the blade to give it a nice edge highlight like the light's reflecting. I'm also going to pick out any of the rings that we painted as well. And with all the metallics highlighted, the only thing left to paint now is the details on the horns. So to start with, I'm coming in with some Ushabti bone. And starting quite near the base of the horns, I'm running a very thin line all the way up to the tip of the horn. You can do this several times across each horn. So there'll be several bands working their way towards the tip of the horn. So try and keep these nice and thin, start near the base and work all the way up to the very tips. And then with some Zamasi Desert, I'm going to put a line within that Ushabti bone, but starting a little bit further up the horn. You're going to do this with several colours, build up to a really nice gradient across the horns. It will give us the look of natural banding that you find on animal horn. So within all of those previous lines of Ushabti bone, just come in with some Zamasi Desert and paint a new line. And now with some XV88, I'm starting a bit further down again. Once again, in every single one of those lines from the previous steps, putting some XV88, working my way towards the tips. Because of the way these horns taper, you'll find a lot of your lines do meet up at the very tip. This is fine, it's okay to have the tip be a solid colour. And now with some Mournfang Brown, I'm once again working my way towards the tips of these models. So for this, I'm really starting quite near the tip, just doing a thin line of Mournfang Brown on each of those previous lines. And then with some Rhinox hide, finally doing a little line each one right near the very tip. This will be our darkest colour. So just focus this onto the tips of all of the horns. Just catching each of those lines with a little bit of Rhinox hide. And then finally with some White Scar, I'm going to do a little line at the base of each of the horns, but in between all of our different lines from before. This will add a bit of interest to the tips of the horns and add some distinction between the areas we painted with the Ushabti bone. And with those horns painted, that is the last detail on this Norse Blood Bowl player. Please let me know in the comments down below what's your favourite Blood Bowl team. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video, and happy painting!